So with Dexter Resurrection now finished, the big question that remains is, did it finally get the ending right? Well, that's kind of a difficult question to answer, because sure, it had a good season finale, but there were lots of other good season finales in Dexter. It's the series finales that Dexter has had real trouble coming up with. But that's not a worry here, because Dexter Resurrection is going to continue. Well, hopefully. Original Sin was also going to continue, and we all saw how that went. And this was knowledge coming into the season that the show was going to last more than one season, or at least hopefully it was going to, but I didn't know how true that was going to be. I didn't know how the ratings were going to be for the season, if there was even still an audience for Dexter, and if people were actually going to care. But it's safe to say none of those worries were actually warranted. Dexter Resurrection more or less knocked this season out of the park, somehow delivering one of the show's best season in what is technically its 11th season of the show. And this is one of those rare cases of a story and a show where the delivery is far better than the premise or idea. When I heard that this show was about a billionaire who collects the world's best serial killers, like a sort of twisted Nick Fury in the Avengers, I actually wasn't all too excited. That idea sounds dangerously close to jumping the shark in the world of Dexter, and yet when I saw the execution of this idea, it somehow worked better than I ever could have imagined. So I'm going to go episode by episode of the first season of Dexter Resurrection, talk about the things I liked, didn't like, and how this season pulled off a near-perfect course correction from New Blood, listened to the fans, and came out with a top 5 season of Dexter. So let's head on over to New York City, get your invitation to Prater's party ready, and have one of our best friends in the world on the hunt to catch us as we talk about Season 1 of Dexter Resurrection. So I've already covered the first 2 episodes in a separate video, but I'll go over my thoughts on them briefly. The first episode I did not think was all that great. There were a lot of hoops that the show needed to jump through in order to have Dexter be alive and not arrested, and the show just didn't really seem all that interested in really explaining this or going super in-depth. Dexter is exonerated because Angela just decided to let him go. Killing the coach wasn't a big deal because it was obviously self-defense, and Dexter is alive because it was really chilly outside. You have to kind of just nod your head and go, yep, okay, I guess that works. Then there was everything with Harrison, and all of his scenes just happened incredibly fast. They needed to get Harrison in some sort of trouble so that way he would need Dexter, so he killed the most over-the-top and cartoony Dexter villain that this series has ever had. His motivation was clear and obvious, evil, and in a way that was so very cheesy. Then we had these police officers, not good cop and bad cop, just smart cop and dumb cop. In the video I made previously, I said that the thing that makes her such a great detective was seeing things that other people don't see clearly. And I thought this was going to lead into her having her own sort of dark passenger or something like that, but just utilizing it in a different way than Dexter does, and I thought that would be very interesting. But no, all she saw was the color of the bags and the way that they were tied. Things that I feel like anybody even just going into the police academy would be able to find. There were some good moments, like Dexter and Batista finally reuniting, though it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, and I'll definitely get more into that later, and this other scene with Uma Thurman's character Charlie going into a serial killer's home and extending him an invitation to somewhere. It was very intriguing, but yeah, this first episode I just wasn't too thrilled with. Despite all the cameos and explanations for everything, something about all of it just seemed a bit off to me, and I wasn't actually too excited to see the next episode, but luckily the first 2 episodes came out together, so I decided to just hit the next episode. And the second episode was a much needed improvement. The characters were written better, Dexter seemed to get his groove back into doing his own detective work on Harrison's kill, set up a new interesting killer, introduced new great side characters, and addressed some of the things I had questions about, like the cameras in the hotel. And with the rest of the episodes really carrying this same level of writing, it seems obvious to me that Michael C. Hall, the writers, and the producers came up with the idea of Dexter and Harrison in New York City, traitor in the band of serial killers, and all of this other stuff, and kind of just worked their way backward, leaving the first episode to be really out of place with the rest of the season. Judging by the reviews, I might be in the minority there. People still seem to really like the first episode, but let's continue on. Throughout the first 2 episodes, the title Dexter Resurrection becomes more figurative than literal. Sure, he was essentially revived from death, but this is also Dexter's second chance at life, to right his wrongs from before, specifically with his relationship to Harrison. But when there's a ghost of his past haunting and hunting him, how much can Dexter truly change? And that's what this whole series is really about. So in episode 3, Dexter is on the trail of this so-called dark passenger, a serial killer taking out rideshare drivers, so he of course becomes a rideshare driver himself. In a lot of ways, this feels like a classic Dexter move and storyline, which is nice compared to New Blood, where a lot of the classic Dexter stuff was more or less absent. But the irony of Dexter now being alive and somebody else having his identity just eats at him, and this comes with some great moments, especially talking with Ghost Harry. The series also continues the pattern of new technology that was present in New Blood, with the dark passenger being hidden to cameras due to the lining in his hood, the background checks being so accessible that he learns from Blessing and his family, and of course, electronic locks. But the series does something different compared to New Blood, where the technology would stump Dexter or blow his cover. In Resurrection, Dexter is actually smart again, finding new ways around this technology or using it to his advantage. And this is really, I think, the biggest change that this show makes when it comes to Dexter as a character. Angel is right this season. Dexter is a master manipulator. He's always gotten free from his crimes, but it's because he's outsmarted his opponents like 8 out of 10 times. Dexter in New Blood was rusty, out of practice, but also just not all that smart. In Resurrection, while everything he does might not be 100% perfect, he's back to being that master manipulator and just all-around smart character that we all know and love. But of course, this season is really split with its storylines. It's about 60% Dexter's point of view, 30% Harrison's perspective, and then 10% with Batista and the other officers. Claudette and Oliva, I don't actually think I ever heard his name, but it's apparently Oliva, go back to the hotel room and somehow retrace all of Harrison's steps to the kitchen. She notices the same trash bags, but tied differently. I figured this would surely lead to some bag tying contest with all the employees, but I guess not. Later, she confronts Harrison, giving what she believes to be the truth of what happened to Ryan Foster, and what she believes to be the truth is 100% moment to moment exactly what happened. But Harrison gets out of this moment by revealing he's homeless, and he's been staying in the hotel in empty rooms, even gets his story corroborated by Elsa. While this definitely gets him out of trouble, Claudette still isn't completely satisfied. But this is another thing that this show does, and is perhaps its biggest achievement, and that's making Harrison a likable character. Now personally, when I was watching New Blood, I didn't hate Harrison. I thought the storyline they gave him was a bit odd. He obviously made mistakes, and overall his reunion with Dexter just wasn't what people wanted to see out of that show, but the writers seemed to take all the fan concerns and critiques and actually listen to them, because Harrison in this show, while yes, he still makes mistakes, he's actually a great character, and we're able to root for him in a way that we weren't able to in New Blood. Angel decides that he really can't let this Dexter thing go, and heads on up to New York City to find and solve the case of the Bay Harbor Butcher once and for all. But not without some cameos from Quinn and Masuka first, and seeing them on screen was so great, and I hope we get some more cameos or even just flat out roles from them in the future, but I'll talk more about that at the end of the video. So Dexter zeroes in on his target, Red Schmidt, the fake dark passenger, and this whole sequence is like the picture-perfect Dexter kill. Dexter drops his needle on accident, so there's some stakes to the scene. The dark passenger attacks, and we're worried for Dexter, but he ultimately gets the needle, stabs Schmidt, and reveals how he was able to survive the attack. That's the formula, and they got it exactly right here. Then of course there's the kill table, finding the invitation to Praetor's gathering, and the disposal, which is really the only part of this kill that I find questionable because he did this exact same thing in New Blood, and that ended up biting him in the ass. So for there to not even be a mention about how this is the same tactic feels a bit weird. Episode 4 was the episode that totally and completely sold me on the show. Because while I liked what I saw out of episodes 2 and 3, we hadn't really got to the real meat of the story yet. We hadn't seen Dexter reunite with Harrison, we hadn't seen Leon Praetor, and really see how the actual concept of this season was going to play out. And like I said, the idea of this season really felt like it could go off the rails very fast and very easy. So while this idea of a party for serial killers intrigues Dexter, it's not like this is new territory for the show. Dexter has always sought comfort with people who are the same or at least similar to him. We saw it with Brian, Miguel, Trinity, Lumen, Hannah, and even Harrison. So with my reservations firmly in place, kinda expecting a little bit of disappointment, those fears quickly left when this episode aired. Charlie picks up Dexter, bragging about how it only took her 3 months to find him, and that great internal dialogue for Dexter retorts about how it only took him 3 days, which is a funny line, but also goes to show how much further ahead Dexter is from these other serial killers that he's gonna meet. While Dexter Morgan is alive and well, officially, that whole identity is still hidden. The Bay Harbor Butcher is still in the shadows, and this is another big theme of the season, Dexter having to separate his different lives. He can't be the same person he was before, where Dexter Morgan and the Bay Harbor Butcher were the same person, not if he wants to be in Harrison's life and be a proper father to him. He knows that now, so for Dexter Morgan to be attending this dinner party but as somebody else really goes to show that he's actively taking steps towards that, even if it's just thematically, since Dexter himself was never actually invited. But then we meet Leon Praetor, and truthfully, I feel like this sorta over-the-top performance could only work with an actor like Peter Dinklage. I think he's got just enough of an excited demeanor when around Dexter and the other killers, but also enough darkness that we suspect there's more to him. In a way, he's a lot like Dexter. He's calculating, manipulative, and we see a lot more of that as the show goes on, but I think Peter Dinklage really knocked this role out of the park. Oddly enough, he kind of reminds me of Lex Luthor from Batman vs. Superman, an over-the-top villain who still has a lot of smarts to him and can one-up people far more powerful than him. But the difference between the roles is that I loved Peter Dinklage's portrayal and I despise Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal. But again, goes to show just how tricky this whole concept and storyline is, and the cast really does a lot to elevate these roles. Speaking of the rest of the cast, this is where that all-star lineup of actors comes into play that this show really marketed heavily. Neil Patrick Harris, Eric Stonestreet, David Dastmalchian, and Kristen Ritter. Now obviously some of these people have bigger roles than others, but I feel like each of them are kinda playing adjacent characters to who they're most known for, maybe with the exception of David Dastmalchian. Neil Patrick Harris plays Lowell, aka the Tattoo Collector, and there's definitely a lot of Barney Stinson in this character. Same goes with Eric Stonestreet and Cam from Modern Family, and Kristen Ritter as Jessica Jones. Not that it's the same performance or even remotely the same character, but I feel like this could very well be Barney in a different universe as a serial killer. David Dastmalchian's Gemini killer is a bit different, but I'll talk more about him when we get to episode 7. Praetor shows Dexter his collection, a scene that really plays out as a walk through the highlights of Dexter, seeing Trinity's hammer, the ice truck killer's table, and even the blood slides. But this room also offers a lot of room for the series to grow, with other killers' famous items, including the characters we meet, but even the stories behind them, like how the blood slides were collected from an FBI agent with a gambling problem. Could that potentially come back in the future? Who knows? Anything is possible. They get to having dinner, and Praetor has been gracious enough to accommodate Red's choice of being vegan, which is such a great moment because of how disappointed Dexter is after seeing all the food. Then they get to the show and tell portion of the night, where Dexter realizes that these are not his people, and they absolutely need to be taken out, so he sets his sights on Lowell, saves a woman from the tattoo collector, and Barney says he isn't gonna beg for mercy because he's been on the other end of this far too many times. Ronald Schmidt might not scare Lowell, but the reveal that Dexter is actually the Bay Harbor Butcher certainly does. And again, this goes back to show just how much further ahead Dexter is compared to the other killers. But as Dexter usually does, he gets close with one specific killer, Mia, aka Lady Vengeance. He gets more information about how long this group has been going on for, other members, and how when a previous member was caught, he ended up offing himself in a jail cell. The other major storylines of this episode are around Harrison and Batista. Ryan Foster's watch that he gave to Harrison to get fixed is ready, and it haunts Harrison, Telltale Heart style, all episode. He meets Batista, and just like when he saw Dexter, they share a nice moment together, talking about Jamie before Batista gets to work, trying to get Harrison to confess that Dexter was a killer, and even accusing Harrison of killing Ryan Foster. But Harrison doesn't give anything up, he maintains his own and Dexter's innocence, but the guilt continues to eat at him, arriving to the police station, and this is where I figured they were gonna mess up Harrison's character. People were gonna hate him even more, but at the last second, Dexter comes and saves the day. I absolutely loved this episode. I still think it might be my favorite of the season just because I didn't really expect it to work nearly as well as it did. The pacing of the season was going so smoothly. We got the big dinner party reveal and an ending cliffhanger of the reunion we all wanted to see. Now, in episode 5, this meeting between the two of them was a really big indicator as to how much this story and this dynamic was going to change, and how fast. Because of course, Harrison wasn't just going to be like, oh, cool, you're not dead. You want to go grab something to eat? Even if that's exactly what Dexter tries to do. Dexter very quickly apologizes to Harrison for what he's put him through, and offers to help Harrison bear the burden in a very literal way.
Let me carry it for you.
There's even a callback and flashback to Dexter in Original Sin and how he almost let his emotions get the better of him, but the person that was there to stop him was Deb, which then leads to the theme of family and how important that is in Dexter's life. And now he's the one who wants to be there for Harrison. This conversation and scene does all the right things, even with Dexter asking if Harrison wants to grab something to eat, and Harrison's like, wait, what? No, everything can't just automatically be better. It was a great reunion scene and a great sign for what's to come. Harrison even brings up Batista, and Dexter immediately knows that Dexter himself has become his fixation, his white whale that he won't stop going after until he's caught or dies trying. But I also kind of want to talk about that Original Sin flashback and now how odd it is since that show was canceled. The show does this a number of times throughout the season, and I like how it does this. It makes all the shows feel more connected now in a way that isn't just like, hey, since we made this show, we have to mention it. I think it brings up these moments and conversations organically, just like it did in this scene, but now we're clearly not going to get any more mentions of Original Sin, or if we do, it'll just be the same thing from season 1. It just all around feels very strange, but I do think I know why Original Sin isn't going to continue, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Now, because Harrison had already called Claudette, he has to maneuver his way out of that situation, saying he feels guilty for not helping Shauna to the best of his abilities, which only makes Claudette even more suspicious of him for some reason. Dexter goes out on a nice bowling date with Mia, a nice callback to Dexter's bowling days with Batista. And Mia proposes that her and Dexter should collab on their next project. Now again, this is territory we've covered before. Dexter getting involved with somebody he was gonna kill, and I was really worried that this was just gonna be another rehash of that plotline, until Mia reveals that she has no code to kill with. She just likes killing. Innocent people, guilty people, doesn't matter. So now we get another classic Dexter dilemma. Kill Mia and risk Prater getting suspicious of this new guy that he let join his club, or let her kill an innocent person. So this new, smarter version of Dexter breaks into her home, plants the evidence of Ryan Foster's death, and calls it in to the police. While it doesn't exactly fit what they were looking for, all the evidence points to Foster's death being done at the hands of Mia. except for her telling the guy that she was gonna kill that he was gonna be her first kill in New York City. This is Dexter at his best, and this is Dexter writing at its best. Everything that is within Dexter's control is done properly, but there's variables that Dexter can't account for that end up throwing a wrench or altogether foiling his plans, and it's just all around what makes this show in particular so enjoyable to watch. Mia goes to jail, and Charlie goes to visit her, saying that she'll get her out of here soon. And in a scene earlier, we learned that Prater's connections to the New York City Police Department run deep, so this episode ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. So another thing I've kind of barely mentioned, this other huge facet of the season, is Blessing and his entire family. Batista is right with what he says later on in this season. Dexter always finds a way into people's homes and hearts, though a lot of the times it's not entirely purposeful. Dexter meets Blessing by riding in his Uber, and eventually moves into his home, attends parties at his house, and even gives a speech at Blessing's mother's funeral. Blessing and his family are really thematic for Dexter this season, with Blessing telling him a story about separating his home life from his work life, and especially his past life with his present life. Blessing teaches Dexter a lot about himself this season and how to act as a person and a father, and while these characters don't get involved in the central plot of the season, I think that's kind of the point. Dexter is separating two different parts of his life, and I think that Blessing will continue to be a pretty important side character going forward. Maybe he's even the New York Ripper. But anyways, Dexter and Harrison attend Blessing's mother's funeral. Dexter gives a very heartfelt speech, and yet his other life literally calls him away, with Charlie and Prater coming to Red's apartment looking for him, and he says that he moved away since he's a pretty private person, and I guess Prater just kinda buys this. Now, I'll talk more about this in the final episode, but this entire season, I always felt like Prater had a couple tricks up his sleeve that he didn't really buy who Red was saying that he was, and while he does have a few tricks up his sleeve, he never really had that one-up factor on Dexter, and by this time of the season, he was kind of just feeding off of whatever Dexter was telling him, which was a bit odd because Prater is supposed to be the one that can one-up everybody and be smarter than those around him, but he's kind of just not that when it comes to Dexter. Meanwhile, Angel has now teamed up with the other detectives, determined to let them know that Mia didn't kill Ryan Clark, and it was actually Dexter. Which isn't true, but this presents a very unique situation for the audience to be in. I think everybody is on the same page when it comes to Angel. We love this guy. He's La Passion. Dexter's best man at his wedding. We can't help but root for him despite his mistakes throughout the course of the series, but do we root for him above rooting for Dexter? No, we don't. So Angel is really doing a lot of the right things in order to actually catch Dexter, but we don't want him to succeed. Does this mean we want him to die? No, absolutely not, but it's incredibly frustrating to watch him now after all these years finally being a good detective. But it's also really great writing to put these two characters that we know and love against each other, and very few shows have had the longevity to actually pull a situation like this off correctly. Dexter returns to the most twisted book club ever, and everybody is freaking out because Mia was arrested, and the sights are now set to Gareth in this episode. Gareth is the infamous Gemini killer, somebody who's completely full of himself, a bit of a weirdo leaving letters for himself in a bookshop. Who does that? So weird. But he actually ends up tracking down Dexter to where he actually lives. And if I haven't done it yet, then I'll do it here and just say, I love watching Michael C. Hall as Dexter. Always have, always will, but especially in this season because he's so smart. He immediately feeds into Gareth's ego, talking about how he's such a fan of his work to the point that it gets his guard down, and Dexter can then do what he does best. There's even a great scene of tension where we think that Blessing is going to find Gareth's body, and all of this is just truly great, especially Dexter and Blessing's conversation about never bringing darkness into the home. There's some side stories with Harrison watching Elsa's son and daydreaming about killing the landlord, which is really just set up for another episode, and then there's Charlie going to some strange man and offering him money. and we see that this guy was actually bribed to bring an end to Mia in prison, just in time to stop Batista and the other detectives from getting to talk to her. But the real kicker of this episode is the ending, where Prater invites everybody to go on an excursion, and who shows up but Gareth, meaning that the Gemini killer is actually a twin. Oh, so that's why he was leaving letters. Oh, I get it now. And this is such a great scene because I was really expecting Mia to walk out of that car and have her death be a fake out, so Dexter would have to get his hands dirty after all. And I think that's what a lot of people were thinking. So for this twist with twins to be the reveal was just such a great way to end the episode. Episode 7 is all about the separating of Dexter's two lives. He's on this extravagant getaway at Prater's mansion, but Harrison also needs Dexter to come and be there for him at his college tour. And we see the difficulty Dexter has at separating the two lives, but not because of his own urges or bad parenting like in New Blood, but because of time and the necessity of Dexter's job. If he doesn't kill this twin Gareth, then he realizes something is wrong, potentially something off with Red, and the whole operation is blown. But he also needs and wants to be there for Harrison. So Dexter has to balance that, but also balance his own temptations. He does like that there's a place and a group of people that he can finally be himself around, to speak the truth without getting looked at like a psychopath, but he also sees the others show and tell, like Al's video and knowing that he needs to take them out. But Prater seems especially moved by Dexter's speech, revealing why he's so obsessed with serial killers and sharing his own backstory and his letter with the man who killed his parents. And Prater says that he feels closer with Red than any of the other serial killers, yet another example of Dexter somehow worming his way into the home and hearts of those he encounters without really meaning to. But then Dexter confronts the Gemini killer, getting him to rage bait so successfully that Dexter can kill him without raising any flags to Prater. And Dexter expertly covers his tracks here, saying that Gemini got Mia arrested and killed Lowell, and this works on everybody except for Charlie, who has always had her suspicions of Dexter, Red, for a long time. So Harrison awaits his father at college, and he's nowhere to be seen. But he does meet Gigi, a tour guide for the college, where she even takes them to a lecture to listen in on, a special presentation with a guest speaker, Claudette. This is kind of a twist that comes from nowhere, but it works, especially when Dexter does arrive and Claudette has heard every suspicion about him and Harrison from Angel. But once again, Dexter diffuses the situation, talking about how Angel used to be a great friend of his, but he really lost his mind after the death of LaGuardia. And while we aren't sure this conversation works, it's a great sidestep by Dexter and makes us see how great he is at thinking on his feet once again. And Claudette comes at him in full force, saying that, oh yeah, she knows who he is, his background, has heard about him from Batista, she's incredibly intimidating, but Dexter finds his way out of this situation once again. It was really this episode that I decided I don't actually think Claudette is that bad of a character. Is she as strong as some other side characters in the past? No, but her writing just continually got better from the first episode, so I'd be happy to see more of her in the second season. There's also a bit of talk about the New York Ripper, something I haven't mentioned yet, but this is Claudette's white whale. The Ripper is to her as Dexter is to Batista, and Dexter even gives her some insight on what the murder weapon could be based on the blood spatter, and on what he knows the weapon to actually be, and through all of this, Dexter kind of finds a way to one-up Claudette, something Harrison was never able to do, yet Dexter does all of this for Harrison. So it tells us that Dexter coming into his life has made a big difference, and this moment shows us that he's able to protect him and divert her attention elsewhere. It's a really great scene. But when Dexter comes home, he recognizes that music and goes upstairs to find Batista. Their interaction feels so foreign from what we know about Angel and Dexter and how they usually interact, and it's truly very tragic. I was seeing all these TikTok edits of their last scene compared to how they used to act on the show, and it's heartbreaking to see there's great edits out there. We want nothing more than for them to see eye to eye, for Batista to go back to Miami, but he's never been that type of person. It's just that now we're on the opposite end of these things, and it's really the ending of this episode that we know things probably aren't going to end well for Batista. Episode 8 is probably the weakest episode of the season outside of the premiere, just not too much of consequence really happens here. We see that Batista, who has started tracking Dexter with everlasting battery life AirPods, is absolutely obsessed with catching Dexter. Once again, he's doing some of the finest police work ever at a time that we really wish he was as incompetent as he was in the original series. He's tracking Dexter's everyday life, so he knows when he breaks from his normal routine, which is unfortunate because that's exactly what Dexter is doing while he's planning to take out Al. Al is going to see Hamilton before he leaves town. Go ahead and try and tell me this isn't just adjacent cam all you want, but Dexter wants to grab drinks with him directly afterwards, so he sets up a kill room just for Al to disappear on him and skip town. Try as he might, Al doesn't want to give any information on where he's going or where he lives, and for the time, it seems that's all we have on Al, for this season. But since he's got the kill room set up, why not help out Harrison with Elsa's landlord situation? So Dexter puts on a really horrible disguise, kidnaps the guy right in front of a clueless New Yorker, which was a funny moment, and goes to scare him into being a better landlord. And that's when Batista shows his big, ugly face and forces Dexter to leave. Batista contacts Claudette and tells her he's got proof of the Bay Harbor butcher, but when she arrives, he's really got no proof at all. Dexter isn't there, he didn't talk to the potential victim, and this is the detective work we're used to seeing out of Angel Batista. But you really can't help but feel bad for him, because the detectives don't believe a word that he said, and it stems from Dexter and his cautions to Claudette about Batista. And Batista is right with everything that he's saying. He tells her that this is what Dexter does, he gets into people's lives and manipulates them, but Claudette just sees Angel as the crazy one here. The episode ends with Dexter and Harrison getting food, and Prater comes up to him, and this was the moment I thought, oh god, Prater knows something about Dexter and the Bay Harbor Butcher, he's figured out his whole life story, and then flash forward to episode 9 a week later. Nope, Prater just really wants to get to know Dexter, so this whole introduction to his son was a bit of a power move, but only because he was hurt that he didn't know more about Red. I was still kinda holding out hope that there was more than meets the eye after this, but not really. Prater just full-on trusted and truly liked Dexter, so I won't lie, I was a bit disappointed in this. I still think that Prater was a good villain, certainly better than the lower-tiered villains like the Skinner, Travis Marshall, and Saxon, but definitely a more mid-tier villain overall. After this, Dexter denies the dessert wine that's been paid for by Prater, and we get an interaction between Harrison and Dexter that I really feel like will be the foundation of the show going forward. Dexter explains to Harrison who Prater really is and what he's been doing this season, and Harrison is really surprised, especially when Dexter brings up the Gemini killer and how Dexter took him out, but then they have this sort of playful back and forth about what Dexter does, their plan going forward, and what's been going on. And this really felt like a glimpse into the future and what people really wanted out of the Dexter and Harrison dynamic. Harrison doesn't have to just be Dexter 2.0, but they can work together and have different strengths and weaknesses while also having a very unique father-son dynamic, just like Harry and Dexter had. Tensions continue to rise with Charlie interrogating Harrison, and he makes some mistakes, like leaving glasses with his fingerprints behind, but the scene shows us two things: that Harrison is getting smarter and knowing how to lie to intimidating people like Charlie, a big contrast to how he acted with Claudette earlier in the season, and that Dexter is becoming a better father. He doesn't yell at Harrison for his mistakes, and instead tells him he did a good job and forms a plan to keep him safe afterwards and rectify his mistakes. There is a moment where Dexter asks Harrison to access some hotel files for him to get Charlie's location, and this seems a bit odd to me. Does Harrison really have access to things like that? And would Charlie's home address really be in the hotel files? Seems like a bit of a stretch to me, but when the other writing in the show is so solid, I give things like this a pass. Dexter goes to Charlie's home address and learns about Charlie's sick mother. He then pulls a red and uses this to blackmail Charlie, which is basically the precise moment she decides that she's done with Prater, especially with how he acts towards her afterwards, but Charlie reveals that everything she does is by Prater's command, meaning that he's disobeying Dexter's order to keep away from his son. So Dexter realizes that he needs to take out Prater once and for all. Meanwhile, Batista goes to the agents with another new theory, but Claudette has been talking with Quinn, and she learned that Batista isn't with Miami Metro anymore, so he's essentially acting as a vigilante. They seize his badge, and he takes one last look at what a functional police department looks like, and he leaves the building without any sort of dignity. As a last-ditch effort, he goes to Prater and takes down like 3 security guards in the process. Seriously, I love Angel, but we never got the sense he was this John Wick character. I'm not even sure if I recall Angel literally fighting anybody ever in the main Dexter show, so this scene felt a bit silly to me, but he tells Prater all about who Dexter really is, and this is when we think that he's really outed Dexter and now everything is gonna fail for him going forward since he was lying. But did we really think that? I knew from very early on that sometime in this season, Prater was going to find out that Red was actually Dexter, who was actually the Bay Harbor Butcher, and Prater was going to be even more excited to find that out. I mean, this dude is obsessed with serial killers, and the Bay Harbor Butcher is like the cream of the crop. So this scene, I don't know, it didn't worry me, even moments later when Prater calls Dexter by his name, when he jumps for joy and says that he loves it. That was what I expected. So please comment below if you were surprised by Prater loving this, or if you thought he was going to be angry, because I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on it. But I feel like the writers almost knew you'd expect this, and that's why there was this reveal of Batista on the table overlaid with Prater telling Dexter that he loves Dexter as the Bay Harbor Butcher, because we were expecting that to be Prater's reaction, but we weren't expecting Batista to be on the table. Except, oh, wait a minute, I was expecting it, because the official Dexter Instagram page spoiled this scene like 3 hours after it aired. Quite literally the same day, before people could get home from work, this scene and Angel's death scene were posted all over Instagram. I was driving over 10 hours away that day, so I didn't get to watch the episode. I got to where I was going and then went to scroll through Instagram for a bit and was spoiled by that almost immediately. This is a bit of a rant here, but that pissed me off so much to the point I didn't even feel anything towards Angel's death when I actually saw it, because I was so angry at the social media team for Dexter for spoiling that for me. And yes, I learned my lesson. I unfollowed that page, but just a supremely uncool move by whoever was in charge of this social media. I hope you're watching this video, and I hope you know how much hatred I feel for you. Speaking of social media, I'm going to do that YouTuber thing real quick and tell you all to go follow my Instagram page. If you like this video or my channel and want to see more behind the scenes stuff, more upcoming videos. I don't do this a lot, but hey, I won't spoil things a few hours after they come out, so I gotta be better than the Dexter Instagram page, right? So where was I? Alright, okay. Dexter gets the offer from Prater to kill Batista and then kill other serial killers that Prater has extensive knowledge of. And this is supposed to be a real stop sign here for Dexter because, yeah, he wants to kill other killers, but will he do that at the cost of killing Batista? With the way the show is going, with how the writers were making Dexter this version of the character that the audience loves to see, if Dexter killed Batista, then everybody would turn on him instantly, and of course, he doesn't do that. But towards the end of the scene comes a moment that I really liked. 9 out of 10 stories would have Dexter cut Batista out of this bind, and the two estranged lovers to enemies would work together to get out of this situation. It's what people expect, it's what they want, and Dexter even comments on this, about how he and Batista can work together one last time, but it's not what happens. Batista is apparently overcome with his hatred and anger towards Dexter that he tries to take him out, and Dexter kinda welcomes this, saying there's something poetic about dying in the hands of your friend, until Prater puts an end to it. This would have been an incredibly impactful moment in the series of Dexter, if the Instagram hadn't spoiled it for me. But anyways, I'm sure a majority of you were very moved or upset by Batista's death. It was tragic, and even afterwards, having his last words be "fuck you" to Dexter is really hard to hear. Batista was Dexter's best friend outside of his family. He was the best man at his wedding. Dexter said if he could be like anybody in the world, he'd want to be like Angel. And for him to die not forgiving or reconciling with Dexter makes his death one of the most tragic for the audience and for Dexter throughout the whole series. Angel died without his dignity, without his Miami Metro badge, without anybody believing him about Dexter, truly without anyone, and I think this death is going to have consequences to Dexter in future seasons, so that leads me to the season finale, the episode that everybody was really thinking about because Dexter doesn't have the greatest track records with series finales, but that's the thing, like I said, this isn't a series finale. So the expectations for this were really that we were just going to get a satisfying finale, and that's exactly what this episode is. This episode is all about the gala, really just a way for all the storylines to converge so that we get the utmost stakes involved. Dexter is trapped in the vault, Harrison goes to work it and free his father, Claudette is in the audience, Prater and Charlie are obviously there, so all hell breaks loose. Dexter finds Batista's phone and is able to contact Harrison, who does his best impression of his dad and lies in order to get where he needs to. Dexter finds the script for season 2 in the files of other serial killers, finds the code, which is the inmate number of the person who killed Prater's parents, and they have a very happy reunion. Truly, the rest of the finale kind of plays out the way you think it would. Prater catches Harrison and makes Dexter comes back, but there is a good callback to Dexter giving Harrison protection, that protection actually being a needle of M99, which I think is an excellent piece of misdirection, and Dexter ends up killing Prater and throwing his body into the bay. The officers find Prater's serial killer laboratory, and Dexter gives a cheeky little fourth wall break about how the audience wants to see this version of Dexter, and he couldn't be more right. It's a solid overall finale. I think the most unexpected thing to happen was Claudette letting out her supreme dance moves, but the finale played it safe. Perhaps a bit too safe, but with a series like Dexter that has the reputation it has for bad finales, I see why they did what they did. It also didn't end on any sort of cliffhanger like I thought it would, and I think that's because the studio didn't know how this show would be received, but judging by the ratings and the confirmation for season 2, yeah, we're getting a second season. But then again, that's what I said about Original Sin. So was the finale of Dexter Resurrection worth watching yet another Dexter show? Yes, it absolutely was. But like I said earlier, there have been plenty of great season finales of Dexter, and I guess only one solid series finale if we're taking into account Original Sin's Cancellation. So if this series finale will be worth it, it's gonna be a tale for another time, because we're at the very least getting a second season of Dexter Resurrection. Now, if there's some disappointment with this series, I think it'll stem from two reasons. Number one, a lot of the side character stories, and number two, the bane of existence for all fandoms, fan theories. Now don't get me wrong, I love fan theories. In fact, I've covered a lot of them on this channel, but I think for that reason, I've come to realize and expect that 95% of fan theories are just a combination of ridiculous, too good to be true, or just flat out wrong. Take this season, for example. Throughout the weeks, a lot was coming up about the identity of the New York Ripper. My TikTok was filled with people theorizing that the Ripper was Blessing, Oliva, Sam, Prater, Jonah, Harrison, and guess what? It was none of those people. It was some dude named Dom Franked. But these are things that the audience can really take and give a whole different life to. It kind of reminds me of back when The Force Awakens came out and people were theorizing about who Snoke was. Was he Darth Plagueis? Was he above the Emperor? Somebody crazy? Mace Windu? Jar Jar Binks? And guess what? It was none of those things. It was some dude named Dom Franked. Not to defend The Last Jedi in any way, but Rian Johnson said that he had already written and filmed The Last Jedi when all those theories started popping up, so they couldn't go back and rewrite it to make Snoke more important. I mean, they could have and probably should have, but that's a whole different conversation. But clearly the New York Ripper wasn't meant to be some big theory. It was just the life it took on with the audience, and that's not a bad thing. Judging by how much the writers listen to the fans regarding this season, maybe Dom Frampt will be like an alias, and we can go through all these theories again next season. But as it stands, the Ripper was just here to give Claudette and Prater some sort of connection, even though they never shared a scene together. Speaking of which, let's talk about the side characters, because people might be disappointed by this facet of the season as well. A lot of the side characters never really amounted to much. I know I was personally expecting some sort of twist like Gigi to be Charlie's daughter, again, fan theory territory, but nope, she's just some girl that Harrison is seeing. Blessing and his family didn't get involved in Dexter's more destructive life, Elsa and her son weren't evicted, Claudette and Oliva didn't uncover some huge case or bust Harrison, so what was their point? Well, what was the point of LaGuardia, Masuka, Angel, Dokes, even Deb back in the first season of Dexter? They didn't uncover anything or do anything of huge importance, but it was all about fleshing out this world. All of these characters are going to be in the show going forward. These people are the new gang of Miami Metro, even if they're more spread out. All the huge named stars of this show that were part of Prater's serial killer gang are gone. Well, except for Al, but I'll get to that in a moment, and all these big names weren't really sustainable for the studio to pay going forward, but all these other side characters certainly are, and this will be the cast going forward with a few others. So that brings me to my own fan theories for Season 2. Take all of these with a grain of salt, of course, but this is the fun part, to guess what's going to happen and be so totally wrong when the season comes out. But starting out, I absolutely think that the New York Ripper storyline is going to continue. I think whatever's in this file, whoever Dom Frampt is going to lead Claudette and Oliva down some Zodiac-style rabbit hole. It'll give them more information than they had, perhaps even one or more suspects, but it won't be Dom Frampt. Or that will be an alias, and this New York Ripper will be the main villain of the second season. Why he's been inactive for so long is very interesting. Why he still calls and leaves messages is also very interesting, but whatever the cases may be, we'll learn more in Season 2, and this storyline will directly tie into whatever Dexter is doing. Dexter will, of course, be tracking down these killers that he got from Prater's vault. I think there's a few that we saw that were active around the area, and for story purposes, I'm going to say that Dexter might not travel very far, or maybe there will be like this slight, like, year-long time jump, and Dexter will have already returned to New York City after traveling and taking out other killers. He's going to get wrapped up in the New York Ripper case. Maybe the Ripper will kill for the first time in years, and that's going to wrap him up in Claudette's whole story. And I think what will be even more likely is that Claudette will actually ask Dexter for his help on the case. This would be a reverse of Season 1, with Angel asking to tag along with Claudette. She'll actually go to Dexter and ask for his help, and we already kind of saw the setup for this when he told Claudette about the blood spatter and how it resembled a hook. And her looking into this theory on her own was proof that she could actually listen to what Dexter was saying. Pair this with Dexter admitting that he has a thing for justice, and I think we could see Dexter back working on blood spatter cases, although this time it would be for the NYPD. So that leaves Harrison. What's he gonna do? Now, this gets me into the conversation of exactly why I think Original Sin was actually canceled. This season set up the Morgan family's love for justice, with Harrison wanting to go into law enforcement himself, and like I said, Dexter admitting that himself. If there is a small time jump, say like a year or so, then that would put Harrison at around 20 years old, exactly how old Dexter was when he first started at Miami Metro. So I think that Harrison and Gigi will start working with the NYPD along with Dexter, and they'll work to solve the New York Ripper case Claudette will grow more suspicious of both Dexter and Harrison, and we'll see those relationship dynamics change as the series goes on. Maybe not next season, but if there's a third, maybe Claudette will eventually realize that Angel was right and Dexter is the Bay Harbor Butcher. So Dexter Resurrection will eventually become the Dexter and Harrison working at the NYPD show, much like Original Sin, with Harry and Dexter working in the same department. Dexter will now take on that Harry role, and Harrison will take on the Dexter role, exactly what we saw out of Original Sin, and for this reason, I think that's why Original Sin was canceled. These two shows would eventually turn into the same thing, an older mentor working with a young apprentice with a twisted dynamic. Sure, the settings and supporting cast are different, but I think because of the similarities and because one of these shows had Michael C. Hall and the other one didn't, that one would outperform the other. So Paramount decided to just not continue with Original Sin. Do I think that was the right move? No, I don't. I think it would be cool to see two similar shows, but in the past and future, with different locations and casts. Original Sin could have continued on, and Resurrection could have continued referencing it, but I think in order to not confuse the general audience on these two shows, and because of how successful Resurrection turned out to be, Paramount is putting all their eggs in one basket. Which is unfortunate for Original Sin and that whole cast and crew. They did nothing wrong to be canceled, and yet here we are. Some smaller theories that I don't quite have a lot thought out for, but I do expect to see the return of both Al and Charlie at some point in the future. Maybe Dexter will track down Al and kill him in some montage opening sequence in the first episode of season 2. And I think Charlie will more or less go into hiding, but maybe pop up for an appearance here and there in future episodes. Maybe her and Dexter will even work together sometime in the future. One final theory I'll give, and this is more of a Hail Mary one, but I think that Quinn is going to have a much bigger role. I don't want to see a rehash of what this season did with Batista, so I don't want Quinn going all PI to take down Dexter, but I also don't think that's what their dynamic would be. It's long been theorized that Quinn knew who Dexter really was, or at least there was more than meets the eye to Dexter, so after hearing about Batista's death, I feel like Quinn could go to New York to confront and think about killing Dexter if he thinks that Dexter killed Batista. Dexter could tell him the truth, that he didn't kill Batista, and Quinn could admit that he knows more about Dexter but just never said anything. I could even see the two of them butting heads but working together in some facet, something that a lot of people wanted Dexter and Angel to do, but Angel was never gonna do that. Quinn, on the other hand, might do that if he knows that Dexter is doing all this for the right reasons. That one's a bit of a stretch. I don't quite know how it would work, but honestly, even if none of this happens, I have full faith in the writers of Dexter Resurrection. I do think that this is one of the all-time great seasons of Dexter, on par with the first 4 seasons and season 7 of the original show. It's so cool to see a show that was great, went through its hiccups, and bounced back with one of the strongest seasons of the show, almost 20 years after it first came out. I just personally wish that The Walking Dead would take some notes. All that said, I still feel like all these ratings are a bit high, but I'll give Dexter Resurrection a solid 9 out of 10. What are your thoughts on the season? Let me know in the comments below, and what are your theories for season 2? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more stuff like this. Special thanks to all my channel members, and I'll see you all in the next one.